Today we're taking a look at the new Trial Director 360. Now this is a video that I've been very excited to make. I was very excited when I finally got my hands on the new version after they made the release announcement. Let's go ahead and jump in. I'm going to double click on this new TD360 icon. Now this video is designed for people who are already familiar with Trial Director and are looking to see if it's worth upgrading to the new TD360. If you're new to Trial Director in general, there'll be more videos coming up. Hit the subscribe button so that you can find more videos that I'll make in terms of how do you set up a case file, how do you do some of the basics. But this video is intended for those people who already have some level of familiarity, if not with Trial Director, the current version, with Sanction or any other trial presentation software like OnCue or TrialPad. So let's dive in. Right now, the first thing that I've done is I've turned off my Wi-Fi on this laptop, and that's because I know a lot of people have been concerned with the acquisition to Ipro and everything becoming integrated into their system, that everything was going to need an internet connection. You don't need an internet connection to be able to run this in court or even to build your case file. It does prefer it to have it that way for functionality that's not existent yet, I believe, but will be built in later. But I'm able to get in here just fine. Now, the first thing that you'll notice if you're new to Trial Director is that you're not going to get put into the main work area right away. Instead, Trial Director is now split up into two parts. One is called evidence and one is called presentations. And while it seems like that might be a little bit of a problem, it's really not that different. These two distinctions, I consider it the same thing as the two different tabs you used to have on the bottom left-hand corner of Trial Director. The evidence is more like the case manager section, and present is more like the presentation tab that you would hit so that you get the presentation preview and launch exhibits from there. So that's the main distinction that you have there. What I normally do in videos like this is I'll build a case with you, but for a couple of reasons that we'll discuss as we go through, I'm going to use the case that I've been tinkering around with as I was testing out the software over the past couple of days, and we're going to go right into that. In the evidence section is the default that it puts you in. I'm going to double click and open my test case that I've been building. And once you do that, you'll see that it should look pretty familiar if you're familiar with Trial Director, or even if you're familiar with Sanction or OnCue, where you have an upper left-hand corner where there's the main level of exhibits, a lower right-hand corner for the way you want to sub-organize things, and then you have a main kind of workspace area to preview and see what you're going to be showing to the jury. And up at the top, another familiar feature from the original Trial Director is that there's a couple of different tabs that you can look at. The way that you're probably most familiar with it is this Case Explorer. That gives you the more traditional documents, transcripts, multimedia layout. If you want to turn that off, come over to the tab, right click and close it. The other thing to keep in mind is there are layouts. And layouts are something, if you're familiar with Adobe products, layouts are something that you're probably really familiar with. It's different ways of setting up the different kind of panes and windows and information sub-windows that you might want to work with as you're working that will change depending on the tasks that you're doing. And so the default layout is probably the one that I spend most of my time in right now, with occasion spending some time in the clip editing layout, although I find that TD360 does a pretty good job of kind of opening up the different panes and things that I need depending on what I'm doing, just by the nature of the clips or the other exhibits that I'm working on. But there's ways that you can set it up depending on task, and you can even customize it and save those layouts as well. So let's take a look at this Joint Exhibit 1, page 1. I'll double click on it and we'll get a preview right here. And so this should start looking a lot more familiar now if you're familiar with Trial Director, where you have the exhibit in here and you have a menu bar. And the new interface, it's kind of Adobe-like, it's kind of Office-like in the sense that you have this ribbon up top, which if you're familiar with Office products, that should be a look that's familiar to you. Up here, you can navigate through the pages using the next button or jumping to a page. You can also navigate the same way here. The main thing that I wanted to be able to do is show you a couple of things. Is when you add an exhibit, it gets added in batches. And so the way that Trial Director works now is instead of importing in either TIFFs that you've created of your documents or just directly importing in PDFs, when you import a PDF, it'll convert all those PDFs into .png files for you, and it does it in the background. And when that happens, there'll be a batch notification on the right-hand side. Also, something that opens up on the right-hand side is, as you're going through and looking through your exhibits, you hit this annotations button, and an annotations toolbar opens up on the right-hand side, which is very familiar if you've been working a lot in PowerPoint. And what you can do here is you have a lot of your annotation tools, and you can adjust all the colors, all the things that you might want to do as you're going through and kind of marking up an exhibit and preparing it for trial, you can do right here. Now, let's say I don't like the way that all this looks and I want to move some things around. That's something that I can definitely do. So let's say I want to move these annotation tools to the top. I can just drag this, and then you'll see there's this kind of a plus sign of different options of where I can put in a pane that I'm moving. So I can do that, move it that way. Let's say I want to keep those tools at the top and then resize it so I can still see a lot. I can move things around. In the upper right hand corner there's a little X mark, so if I want to close something out, I can definitely close it out. If I've gotten things way out of hand, let's say I move this around here and I don't like where I'm putting it, I can always come back to the layouts and go back to my default layout and kind of have everything reset for me, so you're not going to get yourself in too much trouble moving things around, so you can feel free to experiment. Now, in terms of getting exhibits into Trial Director 360, you can use drag and drop, you can use the import button. We'll use the plus sign here to add the items to import our documents. What I'm going to do is, I've already added a couple, I'm just going to add in a couple more just to show you what the process is like, and a couple of things that I think are a little bit goofy and I think need some work. I'm going to go to my desktop, and I have a couple of exhibits here, Defense Exhibit 21 and Defense Exhibit 23, and I'll hit next. And what's nice is you have this preview window here that shows you what the exhibits are that you're using, and it also gives you a preview of what the exhibits will look like if you name them or change any of the parameters up here, which is something that the previous versions of Trial Director didn't do, and I find these to be pretty helpful. So when I drill down into these, what I could see is if I use file name as the naming convention, it tries to figure out what I'm doing here, and it takes Defense Exhibit 21 and makes page 2 D022 as if these are bait stamped numbers. That's not what I need it to do. So what I typically do is I use the starting with, and I will then add change the page delimiter, and I'll usually set it to 4 because that's a safe one. Sometimes there's exhibits that have 5 digits of pages within them, but that's relatively rare. The only problem with this is that when I look at the preview for Defense Exhibit 21, this now looks exactly how I want it to look. Defense Exhibit 21 dash page 1 through however many pages there are. But the thing that's a problem with using this name items using and rather than the file name is that Defense Exhibit 23 is now being named Defense Exhibit 22 because it's just sequentially ordering them. So one thing that you have to watch out for is that when you're adding exhibits and you have a gap in your numbers, you're going to have to stop. So it's going to be a little bit of a problem. I'm hoping that they can address that relatively easily in an upgrade. And since now TD360 is going to be on a subscription basis, hopefully little fixes like that can get pushed really quickly without having to wait a terribly long time for it. But that's something to just watch out for. So right now I'll just bring in Exhibit 21. And I'll use starting with, use the same 4 digits, page delimiter, and hit add. It'll add it, and I could see it pop up in the document batch pane on the right hand side. I'm going to add one more document, and I'll add document 23. Next, use the starting with, and it's added. And then I'll hit closed, and it won't show up right away. And so if I look in my Defense Exhibit section, it only goes up to 20. I'm still waiting on 21 and 23. It's working in the background. So as that gets completed, those documents will then get added in, and I'll be able to see them in the Documents Explorer here. Now, the next thing that I want to talk about is transcripts. And one of the things that you could do is when you're going to transcripts is you can switch to a different layout. You can go to the clip editing layout, or you can just use the layout here. The way that you add transcripts is a lot easier than it used to be. It used to be very finicky in the past to be able to add a synced transcript, especially to Trial Director. Now it's a lot simpler. You can simply drag and drop a .cms or a .mdb file into this Transcripts Explorer, or you can hit the plus side to add an item. Let's go find one here in my computer. And I'm going to go into this folder that I've set up with some test exhibits and examples, and go to this Hornbake file and grab the .mdb here. Double click on that, and then a window will pop up and it'll give me the name of the deponent and any other additional information that I need to fill out. If for whatever reason the first name and last name don't populate, I would recommend filling that in because later on when you make clips, the clips are going to auto name themselves based off the first and last name. So you have that. And then if you notice at the bottom, it knows that this is a synced video file, and it knows that it's looking for video files somewhere, but it can't currently find them, and that's why the file size says 0. Before, you would just have to import the exhibit in Trial Director and then double click on the disk icon, and then an arrow would pop up and then you have to go find it. Now it's a lot simpler. You can simply locate the file. They were in the same folder, click on the first one, and then it's smart and it figures out the rest of them might be in there too. And it has found the other video files that were in there, and you can tell that it found the other videos by the fact that there's a file size now in there. So I'll add that in. And that's it. Okay. Oh, let's add a new transcript name, and we'll just call it volume 1 since the other one's volume 0. I'm adding the same one in a second time, and hit next and add. And there it is. I'm going to hit close. And now I could see I have this second one, which I've named volume 1 right here. So I can double click on that in the transcript section. Once I double click on that, it'll open up here, and any synced video will show up on the upper right hand side. So the options that you have in the transcript viewer area are very similar to the ones that you had before. They're just in somewhat different areas. To make a clip, if you wanted to start making some clips, maybe you wanted to make some omissions by a party opponent, or maybe you wanted to prepare some impeachment clips, you would just go to whatever portion of the deposition you wanted, select the lines that you want to have for your clip, right click, and you can create a clip. When I do that, it gives me the first initial, last initial, and I've changed my settings because I don't like the default. What I really like just to have is the starting page and line, and I'll hit save. And then there's some silence in this one. Do I want to continue? If I exclude the silence, I'm going to hit no so that it doesn't exclude the silence. It's a little bit weird. I think that little error dialog should be a little different. It should say, do you want to exclude silence or not? Because in either event, I want to continue. But that's that. And now I have the clip right there, and I can take a look at it. So here's, I can play it and I can preview it. And it looks like the pause is at the beginning. So, oh, there it is.
Let's see, since this right response was answered sometime at the end.
All right, so it looks like the pause of the silence might have been at the beginning that we were concerned about, but in either event, I've got to edit this, so let's go ahead and do that now. If I come over to the clip section, now I can see the clips RH045004. That's, I think, the one that we were working with. And let's, the way to do that, I was kind of looking up here trying to figure out a way. It took me a while for whatever reason to find how to get to the waveform editor. But to get to the waveform editor, you don't right click on the actual clip segment itself. The only option you get is to remove the segment. You got to come up here and right click and open click, or you hit select it and hit this button here to open the item. When you do that, then you're going to see the waveform editor that you're more comfortable with. What I like to do is sometimes, I think it's because of how I had the layout before, or if you go to the clip editing layout, it's going to be a little bit easier, but in either event, we can change it. I like to have the transcript below here, so I can see what's going on right below some of the waveform stuff. And I can check here, and right now all the same tools you had before in the waveform editor, which is probably my favorite waveform editor of the ones that I've worked with, are still here. The waveforms work really well. I feel like I can just look visually at the waveforms and get a lot of the editing right just based on that. You can zoom out a little bit if you have a big gap of silence and you want to try to figure out maybe where does the question start next. Or you can left click or right click on any of these squares to decrease or increase where you want to move the playhead to start. And then you can preview it by hitting the play button. So it seems like there's a little bit of a gap. I'm going to keep hitting this right mouse. There we go. And test out right there.
Dr. Sins.
All right. And so I like the way where it starts there, so I'll hit the set start button, and then I'll listen for the end.
No.
I'm pretty happy with how it ended. I'm good with that, so I'm going to hit save and mark it as final. So that's the waveform editor. It still works really well. You still get the objections avoidance, you get the silence avoidance, all those tools that are pretty helpful. It's still cumbersome though if the objection avoidance doesn't work exactly right, or if the silence avoidance isn't working right. And so it's still a little bit cumbersome in terms of if you've broken a clip into multiple segments, how do you merge those back together, or how do you massage that? That still takes a little bit longer than I wish it would. And other products out there like OnCue definitely handle it a little bit better in a much faster way for me. But overall, in the overall editing experience, it's really good. And the video that you just watched is an MP4, so MP4s are supported, and you'll be able to get the waveforms in the waveform editor. I don't know if it was just me. I know that at least there's a handful of other people that no matter what they did, they couldn't get MP4s to show up in the waveform editor in Trial Director 6. So this is definitely something that's very exciting to me because I prefer working with MP4s. All right, so now that we've got some of that, let's get a workbook set up. I've created a workbook already. I call it Test Cross. And you know what? I'm just going to go ahead and delete, hold down Shift, clicked on the top, clicked on the bottom, and select them all and right click and remove them from workbook, just so we can start with a clean slate. And I'm going to go through it and click on a couple of pages that I might want to work with. Let's click on page 18, and there it is over here. And let's close some of these layout editors because I don't need them. All right, so I have 18. Let's move that to the workbook. Now, the previous setup in Trial Director 6, sending it to workbook was a little bit kind of like a secret handshake. You had to click on the workbook you wanted to add something to, then come up and find the page, right-click, and send it to workbook. Now you can just send something to workbook, and you could pick if you have a long list of workbooks, you can select which one you want to send it to. Let's grab that. Let's grab also the annotation or the revision that I saved. So we'll send that one to the workbook as well. Now let's switch over to the presentation part of it, the part that I'm most concerned with because this is where I spend most of my time. Go to present and the same case name will be there. And then once that opens up, I'll see two different views. So on my external monitor, I'll see a black screen with the Trial Director toolbar at the bottom, and all the same tools exist, and none of that has really changed. And on my laptop screen, what I'll see is a similar but different layout in terms of what I get to work with. So I am someone who frequently worked in the presentation preview layout in Trial Director 6, so this looks extremely familiar to me. It's just a slightly more streamlined version of that. Other people work from the main kind of view and rather than the presentation preview pane, they work from the main view section. And so this is going to be a little bit different for them because you have to work in it this way. The other thing to keep in mind, and the reason why I couldn't get a real good look at Trial Director 360 when I was at Ipro Innovations earlier this year, is that if you're not connected to anything, if you're only looking at your laptop, that second monitor where the traditional Trial Director jury screen sits on top of your laptop, and it doesn't giving you an option to look at the laptop screen that we're looking at now. But here's the laptop screen that we're looking at now that you can only see if you're connected to an external monitor. And you'll see everything. We've got the clips that we've made here, the documents, transcripts, and the workbooks that we have. If we drill down into the workbooks, we could see that test cross workbook that we made and all of the exhibits and clips that we had put in there. So the thing that you'll want to keep in mind is there's a disconnect in terms of how things are editable and changeable in the evidence versus the presentation screen. And so here in the presentation screen, I can't edit and drag and drop the items in my workbook like I could in the evidence section. So I'm not sure why that is. I wish that could be changed because a lot of times I need to do edits on the fly, and you can have both the evidence and presentation open at the same time. But then I think if you make any changes in evidence, you have to then reopen presentation anyway. And so a little bit of a disconnect. I think there's a little bit of some massaging that needs to be done in how those two pieces kind of work together. But let's double click on that first exhibit that we have to get it in there. And we have the same 4 buttons that we had before: mirror mode, present preview, and clear presentation. The way that I typically like to work is I like to mouse over to the second screen, hit Alt-T, and make that toolbar go away so I have nothing on the other screen. And then I like to hit mirror mode. And from here I can do all the same things that I was always able to do. I can zoom in on a paragraph, and I can still do all the same things that I think are awesome about Trial Director. I can resize this call out. So if I didn't get enough or I got too little, I can adjust that. And by hitting either Control or Shift, if I hit Control, I can shrink the size of my call out to make it take up less of the screen. Let's say if I needed to grab another paragraph, I can do that and show 2 things at the same time. Or if I needed to skew something or unskew something, if I hold down Shift, I can skew things. And I see a lot of people do this in order to, again, fit a whole bunch of callouts on the screen at the same time. It's a pet peeve of mine. I kind of hate that. I don't like it when text looks squished or stretched. But anyway, it's available to you if you need to do that. The other thing that's nice is, I'll double click that to make it go away. If I have something with a carryover paragraph, and let's find another exhibit, something that has just like a regular carryover paragraph. No. Let's go into exhibit 9 here. What's nice is it gives you in parentheses how many pages are in that exhibit. So now we've got this page up, and we can still navigate all the same ways we used to. There's a secret bar on the right. There's the secret thing on the bottom here. And we can flip through pages relatively quickly. So here's the feature that I really like using. A lot of times what I'll do is with attorneys that if they don't really know exactly which portion of a document they want to call out, I'll drag this button over here over to my toolbar, and I'll hit the one that makes it fit to width so that the document is a little bit wider. And then as I can use it, right click and drag and hold and drag, and that's the fastest way for then scrolling. Scrolling only gets you like a little bit of the document at a time, but if you right click and hold to grab a document, it gets you somewhere really quickly. And it seems to be a lot more stable than before, because a lot of times when I would use this click and drag method in Trial Director 6, that would make the connection between the presentation on my laptop versus the presentation that the juror is seeing get kind of disconnected a little bit. Now it seems to be a little bit more stable, and I can show people the carryover paragraph. That's one of my favorite things. Otherwise, you have to set the pages side by side, get 2 different callouts and set them up, and it just gets a little bit confusing that way. Sometimes it's just a little bit easier to show the carryover paragraph this way. So very happy with how that worked out. The other thing that I've noticed, and a couple of other issues that I've noticed so far with this version of Trial Director, is, let me show you what's going on here. So we made a couple of clips in the evidence section, and I want to show you how those look in Trial Director in the presentation section. Here's one that I made using an MPEG-1, and this one seems to work just fine. This is one that I made earlier. We didn't see this part. We made another one using an MPEG-4, and that's kind of a little bit of a spoiler for you.
And you summarize the amendment as making...
And I'll just pause that and then clear the preview. It ended up working just fine. So here is the preview that we made earlier today with the MPEG-4 that I imported. And for whatever reason, we saw the video. We had trimmed it ourselves and we did it fine. But right now, trial director does not recognize that this is a video clip. Now, to its credit, it's not giving us nothing. So, and that's what sometimes you would get, or sometimes what you would get in trial director when there was an error. You would see the transcript on the bottom, and then you would have like a play button and a blank screen on the top, but you could press it and it would do nothing. Now it's at least giving us just the text as a text clip. But for whatever reason, it's not working. I've made a couple of other ones also in the past, and they've done some weird things for me too. So here's one that I made using the same transcript with MPEG-4s. I made it ahead of time. Same thing happened. I made a video clip, edited it, trimmed it up in the clip work area, and now it's just giving me text. And then this one is the weirder one still. This one, when I play it, it looks like everything's going to happen correctly. It's giving me the right page and line. It looks like it's giving me a video. But when I play it, if you listen to the video.
And then what that basically is, MS, BPH, and diabetes, that causes people to
the
have
video
problems with
is not
urinary retention,
what is
right?
playing in terms of the scrolling transcript
Urinary,
below it.
yes.
So I'm not sure. Maybe it's
And then
pulling the
urinary
same time
retention,
code but from a different video clip. That's what I suspect is happening. Maybe it's playing the first one. Rather than whatever this might be, whether it's clip 2 or video 3 of this deposition. But something is definitely wrong with it. Something's happening. I'm not sure if that's an MPEG-4 issue or what. But ultimately, the weirdest thing about it is that this issue doesn't happen at all in the evidence section. So that's just a little bit of a weird quirk and ultimately a little bit disappointing. One of the things that I thought what I was really looking for in terms of Trial Director 360 and where it was going and what this release was going to do is I was looking for more stability. And that was in the two areas that we just saw problems with. One is in videos and the other is with really large exhibits. For whatever reason, really large exhibits take a really long time to open up. I'm not a database architect, but that doesn't make that much sense to me from a database perspective. I don't know why Trial Director would load up all 9,000 pages of them, especially because of the fact that once I show page like 1 of Exhibit 9 and then go to page 2, it still takes a long time. It's not any faster, so it doesn't seem like there's any preloading happening. I'm not sure what's making it take so long. And there's not a very quick way of being able to rifle through the pages. That happens to me all the time, where an attorney will ask for one of the 6 or 7 or maybe 10 patents that are going to be discussed in a case, and they'll say, all right, let's look at the beginning, let's look at the abstract, let's look at the inventors, who the assignees are, now let's look at the claims, or now let's look at table 1 or example 3. They won't know the page, and maybe their outline didn't have the page, and so a lot of times that's the thing that I kind of try to look for and prepare ahead of time. But sometimes on cross, if we have to go somewhere quickly, we might not have that ahead of time, and so I need to be able to rifle through pages really quickly, and this still isn't giving me that. But overall, that's my basic take. I know this is a relatively long video, but there's so much to cover. This is really only a preliminary view or kind of my first impressions of Trial Director 360. I'll be getting into a much deeper dive into it, testing things like the stability of video in terms of depth designations and synced exhibits. I'm going to be diving into more batch stuff. I've kind of played around with it a little bit. I'm going to dive into it deeper, make sure there's not something that I'm missing. And I'm going to be working a lot with save stages, issue tagging, and other kind of trial prep work. I also haven't talked about the exhibit stickering and the exhibit labels, which I saw a preview of that at Ipro Innovations, and that's pretty cool. So that'll definitely be a video in and of itself. But in terms of my overall thoughts at this point, what I was really hoping for was that we would have something that was a lot more streamlined and fast. They had a real opportunity here with Trial Director 360. They were changing the architecture from an Access database to SQLite. I thought with that would also give them a lot of freedom to kind of make things make sense in a little bit more of a cohesive way. What I forgave over the years is that as Trial Director grew from Trial Director 5 to Trial Director 6 and all the other revisions up to that, is there was feature creep. And so some things were in tabs in the upper left-hand corner, some things were in panes in the lower right-hand corner, or in the lower right kind of towards the middle. And that's how things were I feel like that's how were coded in bits and pieces and then slapped together. Now, when you're rebuilding something, you had an opportunity to really make everything make intuitive sense for users and strip out a lot of the features that people really weren't using. And I don't really feel like there were many changes in that regard. And so while it looks a little bit different and certain things are changed and moved around, a lot of it is still the same, both for the better and for the worse. And so the things that were good are still the same, and I'm really happy about that. I'm really happy that the waveform editor hasn't changed substantially, and we have now support for MP4s. What I'm unhappy about is that it's not any faster than it was. In fact, it feels a little bit slower to me. That just might be my anecdotal experience on this particular machine, which doesn't have discrete graphics. Now keep that in mind, because I know now in the minimum system requirements, they're saying that you should have at least discrete graphics, and the recommended specs are to have 6 gigs of external, I think it's 6 gigs of external graphics. It was something ridiculous, something that I think most systems don't have. I'm not exactly sure where the horsepower for discrete graphics is going to be pushed towards, if that's going to be to make exhibits that are 9,000 pages open quicker. That'll be nice to see. So I'm going to get a couple of different machines that do have discrete graphics, play around with that. We'll be getting deeper into that. But from an initial review, I'm not sure that we're ready to switch to Trial Director 360. In our office, we're using OnCue right now. The transition in the learning curve wasn't tremendous. And now that I've switched to that, I really prefer that as my first choice. A relatively close second choice is Trial Director 6, the older version, not the TD360. But I am optimistic, and I'm anxious to see what happens to TD360 in the future. If there's something that you think that I totally got wrong or missed or need some clarification on for the next videos as I get into a more in-depth review, let me know in the comments. I'd love to hear from you guys down there in terms of what you guys are thinking as to where this product is going. And I will talk to you guys down there.